Over the last week, there's a video that has been played around and around of a pastor that is standing in front of his church defending a decision. As he does so, his voice is calm, reasonable, very even. He's not yelling or sweating. Instead, he's talking about grace and about second chances, how the gospel doesn't leave anyone behind. And every word that he says is absolutely true. But that's what makes this so hard. Because 2 days after that video, he resigned. And others did too. Not because of what he did, but because of who he chose to protect and how he chose to protect them. I'm not here to tell you his name. I'm not here to relegate his case. I'm here because this isn't the first time a church had to answer this question, and it won't be the last. So today, we're talking about the thing churches don't want to talk about. What happens when grace becomes the reason we stop protecting people? When does protecting someone's future stop being about grace and instead starts becoming about a risk to a child? Hey, I'm Josh, and this is Beyond the Numbers. This is a podcast where we have real and raw conversations about what healthy ministry and healthy leadership should look like within our churches, reflecting more Christ-like instead of more like the world and corporations. If this is your first time here, or maybe you've watched a whole lot of videos and you just never actually clicked that button to subscribe, do it today. Here's the line I want to draw clearly because I think that we've blurred it. At least we've made it more complicated than it needs to be. This conversation isn't about grace versus protection. This is about grace versus secrecy. Specifically, in this case, secrecy about a risk to a child. Those are not the same fight, and churches have been losing the second one while telling themselves they were fighting the first. Grace says God can save anyone. I believe that. I will stand up on the pulpit and preach that on a weekly basis. But somewhere along the way, we started treating grace and quiet like they meant the same thing, and they don't. Telling parents the truth about who has access to their kids, it's not the opposite of forgiveness. It's not even in the same category. You can believe God can fully restore a person and still believe that restoration doesn't automatically come with unsupervised access to children. Those are two different questions, and a church that collapses them into one isn't protecting grace. Instead, it's protecting itself. And I think if we're honest, a lot of us have watched this pattern over and over again. A leader falls, the church closes ranks, word gets out anyway, as it always does, and by the time it's public, the story isn't look how God can save and restore someone. The story is look what they knew and for how long. I mean, that's the wound that's underneath this. It's not that people don't believe in grace. It's that we've watched grace get weaponized as an excuse for silence. And every time that happens, it makes the next person less likely to trust the church, especially a church with the truth at all. I spent over 16 years in the ministry. I'm still in it. As a youth pastor, a family pastor, an executive pastor, interim pastors, I've done a lot of different roles. And I've sat in meetings where you're told something in confidence and you have to decide in real time, is this something that I'm allowed to say? Is it something that I need to keep quiet? Who can I share it with? Whom can I not? And is this something that I've been told to secrecy, but I know that this is something that should not remain secret? And truth is, I've never had to stand where that pastor did, at least where he did a few weeks ago. But I have an idea of what it's like to hold information. and have to decide, is this something worth saying or is this something keeping quiet about? I feel like most of you that are watching this, if you've served on a church staff, you've had those different moments where you've wrestled with that. And I think it always boils down to there is a level of secrecy when you know this is something that needs to be talked about. Maybe not like proclaim from the mountaintops, but this is something that people need to be aware of. And us keeping it quiet and not saying anything is going to cause more harm than good. And in those moments, sometimes staying quiet is the easier choice. And you can always tell that because there's a moment where discretion and self-protection start looking identical from the inside, even though they're not the same thing at all. And that's the part that I want to sit with. It's not, was this pastor in the right or the wrong? I'll let that play out. I mean, there's already people that are going to judge that and we're going to find out more information. But how do the rest of us tell the difference in our own churches before it's our name in the headlines? One of the things that I keep on coming back to when I look over this is two scriptures that are side by side. The first is in 1 Corinthians 5, where Paul writes to a church that is tolerating a man that is living in unrepented and blatant sin. And Paul doesn't soften the blows. Instead, he tells them to put him outside of the church. And the thing about Paul's letter is, yes, it's written to the church in Corinth, but this letter was being cycled around as well to other local churches and synagogues and different meeting places. So this is something that is being talked about. And Paul does that not because he doesn't believe in grace. He shares that because he knows a church that stays silent about known harm isn't protecting anyone. Instead, it's just protecting its own comfort. And then I think the thing that people miss is that the very next letter to this church in Corinth, Paul tells the church that the man has repented, and so because of that, restore him within the church. The door came back open. I mean, that's the whole rhythm there. Truth first, restoration after. Never restoration before truth. Then you have Matthew 18. Jesus is talking about causing one of these little ones to stumble. And he says something so brutal and yet so profound. He says it would be better for someone to have a millstone tied around their neck and be thrown into the sea than to harm one of these little ones. That is not gentle language. I mean, this is the same Jesus who touched lepers, who ate with sinners, who forgave the woman that was caught in adultery. And yet, here he is drawing an immovable, hard line around the safety of children. Grace for the person, protection for the vulnerable. Both. It always has to be both. And here's what health actually looks like if we look practically at what those scriptures are saying within our own church context. It is a church that decides its disclosure is standard before a crisis, not during it. A private conversation first where we tell those people, we want you here, and here's what your role, here's what the information that's going to be let out looks like. Here's who needs to know and why they need to know. Not instead of grace, but that is part of grace. But we need to figure that out now before we reach the critical moment where things are being let out and people are having to resign and people are harmed and hurt. So, was this pastor wrong? As I said earlier, I am not going to rule on a case that I've only seen a video and a few small articles about. But I'll tell you what the standard is that I hold myself and any other church that I've been a part of to. If withholding information means a parent loses the ability to make an informed decision about their child's own safety, that is not grace. That is secrecy. That's secrecy that's wearing grace's name every time. So what does that look like for us? What can we do to start making sure we're not part of the problem and instead we're part of the solution and doing what Christ has called us to do to protect the church and show grace? I don't want to leave you with just like a feeling. Here's what this actually looks like depending on where you're sitting. If you're a leader, build your child safety disclosure policy now. While there's no fire to put out, now is the time to decide in writing what triggers conversations with elders, what triggers information to parents, and what a limited supervised role looks like. Do it before you need it. I mean, honestly, nobody makes their best decisions under the spotlight when everyone is staring at you in the midst of a crisis. That is why now is the time, if you haven't heard me say it multiple times throughout this video. And if you're a parent, you're allowed to ask your church what their child safety policy is. That's not distrust. That's stewardship. A healthy church welcomes those questions. A defensive answer already told you what you need to know. And if you're someone that's recovering, maybe you have made mistakes, you have paid your time, and you're still wanting to get plugged into a church, and you're carrying a history like the one that we're talking about today. Don't run from a church that wants honesty over hiding. The path back in isn't through secrecy. It's the harder and slower road of transparency with people who choose to walk with you anyway. But sometimes that's what grace looks like. And if you're watching this video today and it's stirring up something within you because you've been hurt by a church that chose silence over your safety or your child's safety, I'm not going to rush past that. If there's an anger there, it's an anger that isn't a lack of faith, but more than anything, that emotion may be one of the most honest things that you feel. But I don't want anger, upsetness, and hurt to get the last word. The same God who says protect the little ones is the same God who says nothing is wasted. And your hurt doesn't disqualify you from healing. And it doesn't mean that every church is the same one that failed you. Grace was never supposed to be the thing that covers harm. Grace is supposed to be big enough to hold truth and restoration at the same time. Because it's the same grace that will one day restore what secrecy has broken. This isn't the first time that a church has had to answer to this question. And honestly, if something doesn't change within our policies, within our courage, within the way that we run everything, to the things that we are willing to say and be vocal about before the cameras are already rolling, if it doesn't change, this also won't be the last time that the church has to face questions like this. Next week, I want to widen the lens because the instinct to protect the institution over truth doesn't always show up here. And next week, I want to talk about why. Until then, I'm Josh, and this is Beyond the Numbers, where we have real and raw conversations about what healthy ministry looks like. Follow, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, if you know that someone is dealing with this or in the midst of this, or maybe they've been hurt and broken because of it, share this episode with them to give them a little bit of hope. Until then, I'll see you next week, and I'll see you in the comments.